You know, I can make positive videos about games. This one was even published by Ubisoft. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of first-person shooters going. I find that a lot of them are quite samey and very boring, with obvious exceptions in the mix of course. This game is one of those exceptions. Call of Juarez Gunslinger, a western first-person shooter that released 6 years ago, developed by Techland Publishing and published by both Techland Publishing and Ubisoft. It's not a particularly massive game, since it's a linear first-person shooter that you can complete inside 3 hours. But in this video, hopefully I can explain why I believe that Call of Juarez Gunslinger is a hidden gem, and a game that if you haven't played, you should definitely go ahead and play. So, let's begin. The story starts in Abilene, Kansas in 1910. An old man rides his horse into the modernising town and enters a saloon. It's here where the bartender recognises him and asks him, "Don't I know you?" To which the man responds that he hasn't been here in many years and that his name is Silas Greaves. A young man sat at the table named Dwight recognises his name as a famous bounty hunter. Dwight then offers to buy Silas Greaves a drink, to which Silas accepts. The young man's questions and the overall attention that Silas is getting in this saloon thus resulted in him telling his entire life story, essentially. From here we experience Silas's story over the course of the game, the way he tells it. Specifically 2 parts of it: Silas Greaves' career as a bounty hunter and his quest for revenge. The driving force of which being Silas's tragic loss of his 2 older brothers, who were murdered by 3 men: Johnny Ringo, Jim Reed, and most importantly, Roscoe Bob Bryant, who attempted to hang the 3 brothers. Of the 3, only Silas survived. "Steam, I'm telling a story, bugger off!" Silas narrates his story even as you're playing it, which I really like because it ensures that even though you're playing a first-person shooter, you know exactly what you're doing and why. So though this game is a fast-paced shooter, at the same time, it never forgets that it's trying to tell a story. The game has a comic book-esque art style, which also has a narrative purpose, as Dwight is always referencing dime novels to which Silas responds with an alternative form of events the way he remembers them. The point being that anything could have happened. Just because a book says one thing does not mean that that one thing is true. And at various points during the story, Silas mentions that his memories may be hazy themselves, meaning his account of the story might not be any more reliable than the books about him, rendering the art style very intelligent and a plot device unto itself. Beyond that, there's also the arcade-esque feel of it, which makes this feel kind of like an arcade western shooter, which is of course caused by the art style again, combined with a fast pace, and a points and combo system which you get when you kill enemies. So if you enjoy playing arcade shooters, then you probably enjoy playing this. The gameplay also features the typical shooter gimmick of slow motion, this time called concentration, which is really well placed and very useful in a game as fast paced as this one. I'll be the first to admit though that the gameplay isn't very challenging, though you can start the game on a higher difficulty. Also, once done with the story, the game allows you to play New Game Plus, in which you play through the entire game from the start with all of your abilities that you've unlocked over the course of the game. The game also features quick draw showdowns just to make sure that you get that full Western experience. Fuck on and die in that, hey! And of course, to complete it all, it overlaps with famous Western outlaws, more accurately a Silas Greaves version of how they met their end. And though it would be fine to leave it at the game's alternate version of events, it leaves just little bits of trivia for the real history and collectibles known as nuggets of truth, which you can find hidden away and placed throughout the main story, which tells us the real history of characters, events, and locations that we encounter. The game informs you with a visual and audible clue that there's a nugget of truth nearby, so they're not too hard to find. Though considering the pace of this game, sometimes it can be hard to slow down and search for a nugget of truth. Back to the gameplay, however, certain missions do actually have a boss fight like scenarios. It's just as simple as shooting an enemy with a lot of health a lot of times and throwing dynamite and all of that. so it's nothing stupidly special unto itself. However, it doesn't really break down the flow of the fast-paced gameplay, and of course on higher difficulties this is more challenging. But even then, it's not challenging enough to really break down the flow of gameplay, which is something that I can really respect. Though from the point of view of someone who prefers a lot more challenge, I'd imagine this is not such a forgivable thing. Though I can't call the gameplay exactly thoughtful, I can't call it mindless either, since Silas Greaves is narrating over the entire thing, talking you through all the details he can remember, which, as I mentioned, makes even the gameplay feel relevant to the story. It's done relatively simply, but also fairly effectively, because I've played through this game God knows how many times, because I find the story quite enjoyable, and I also find the gameplay very satisfying. There are also some amusing lines in there for those who listen for them.
It was a riverboat, right? I mean, it's not like it was a goddamn ocean liner.
Oh yeah, but I was in a fight.
Did you hear about that ship that's gonna launch next year? Largest one in the world.
You're talking about the Titanic. If you ask me, it's too blessed big. I don't think it'll even float.
So anyway,
Don't be stupid, Steve. They know what they're doing. They say that the Titanic is unsinkable.
oh god.
It's just an amusing, fun little story experience. 3 hours and you're done. However, I do understand why a lot of people might have overlooked it. Call of Juarez Gunslinger isn't the only game titled Call of Juarez. There were 3 Call of Juarez games before it: Call of Juarez Bound in Blood, and Call of Juarez The Cartel. Of the 4 Call of Juarez games, I'd go as far as to say that Gunslinger is perhaps the best of them. But that doesn't really matter. What matters is that Call of Juarez Gunslinger is leaps and bounds better than Call of Juarez The Cartel, the game that came before it. Now, I can't think of many nice things to say about The Cartel, so I'm just going to get to the point, but it wasn't that great. And pretty quickly afterwards, the franchise found itself being forgotten about. And since by that point, Gunslinger was probably already deep in development, they decided to finish that game before wrapping up the franchise, because let's face it, there hasn't been a Call of Juarez game since Gunslinger, and I doubt there'll be any ever again. If you're watching this in 20 years time just after completing Call of Juarez Your Mum's a Dickhead, then I apologise for being incorrect. That, and as far as my knowledge allows me to remember, Call of Juarez has never been particularly popular, so that combined with the Cartel just being abysmal, Gunslinger was never going to get much time in the spotlight. It wasn't entirely out of the spotlight though back in 2013 when the game launched. However, what little fame it got, it was soon forgotten about. It was never a massive game, it's not even AAA. In fact, I do believe that the game only ever saw digital release. So in reality, it's a very small game, making it very easily overlooked. And in a franchise as dead as Call of Juarez, I can understand why a lot of people would just simply forget about it. So there's plenty of reason why a lot of people may never have played this game. That being said, I wouldn't necessarily call it underrated either, because most of the people I know who have played this game rate it quite highly. It won't necessarily be everybody's cup of tea, however I think based on the vast majority of people I've asked who've played it, I can quite confidently recommend this game to just about anybody. If you want a fast-paced first-person shooter that never forgets that it's trying to tell a story here, with a lovely western theme and an amazing soundtrack as well as fun, satisfying gameplay, which is relevant to the story in its own abstract way, Call of Juarez Gunslinger is a game worth playing.
After the fight, maybe we could treat ourselves to some fried chicken. So let me start again. I finally reached those damn stables.
In my opinion, Call of Juarez Gunslinger truly is fantastic, and it's never been particularly expensive. I believe it's like £11 on Steam, so if you haven't played it then I would 100% recommend going ahead and getting it and playing it. I'm not sure that anything else really needs saying. Call of Juarez Gunslinger is a great game, go ahead and play it. Before you click off this video though, I'd like to talk about a meetup that we are doing in London on the 3rd of August this year. I'll leave a link to the video made by James in which he explains the process of how you can actually attend this meetup, as for security reasons we don't want to disclose the address of the meetup publicly. All the details are included in that video, so I'll just leave a link in the description. However, if you aren't interested in the meetup, what are you waiting for? Go pick up Call of Juarez Gunslinger and give it a go. Hopefully you won't regret it. I mean, you never know, everyone's gaming taste is different. Gaming taste? Weirdest 2 words I've ever said together. I can sit here for as long as I want praising this game, but the only way to prove it to you is if you actually go ahead and play it, so I'm going to leave you at that. Thank you for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends and all that wonderful stuff, and I'll see you all very soon with another video at some point.